This is the Intellectual Investor Podcast. Special episode, Stansberry Investor Hour interview. For more episodes, go to investor.fm. Or to read this article instead, head to contrarianedge.com. In this podcast with Dan Ferris at Stansberry Investor Hour, Vitaliy and Dan have an informative conversation about his new book, Soul in the Game, how the pandemic impacted the macroeconomy, how to create a mental model to deal with inflation, Vitaliy's writing process, and the difference between an art and a craft. Enjoy.
Vitaliy, welcome back to the show. Good to see you again.
Dan, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
So it's actually a rare thing that I respond to a guest who says, hey, let's talk. I have something on my mind. I think this is only the second time it's happened, because most people who reach out to me and say, I want to be on your podcast, like, I don't give them the time of day because, I know they're trying to sell something that I don't want to sell. But I've known you for many years, and you're certainly one of the most informed and knowledgeable investors that I know. And when you reach out to me and say you want to talk, I'm all ears, and I want our listeners to be all ears as well. So I'm very curious to know, do you have something special in your mind? I know it's been a while. Maybe it's just that.
Well, I have a few things. So what I suggest we do, we can talk about the economy and the markets, and then we can talk about something I deeply care about, which is the book that's coming out on the day this podcast is coming out as well. And you read the book, so and you read it before many people have, so you qualified to talk about this. That's why I want to talk to you, because
I did, and I enjoyed it very much. It was very personal, and of course, very well written. You're a very good writer. Enjoyed it a lot. Before we do get to that, though, obviously, since we last spoke, the world has changed a lot is perhaps an understatement, unlike any other. And I've been talking with people like traders, futures traders and stock traders and option traders and long-term fundamental oriented investors and value investors as well. We just spoke with Chris Pavis last week, and
a friend of mine.
And I'm most curious in every case to know, do crisis times like we've had since the pandemic began, does this change anything for you? Do you do anything different at those times that you don't do at other times?
Well, I think what the crisis has done, it changed the macroeconomic picture of the economy. It changed. I think it's going to have a significant impact on what the economy is going to look like for a long time. Because if you look at the last 10 plus years, we kind of lived in a borrowed time. And the borrowed time was, we were borrowing basically from the future, right? The government was issuing debt. It was driving, the interest rates were at all-time lows. In some cases, they were negative. And that has changed a lot of things about the economy. We borrowed a lot from the future. We levered the economy. And let me give you a couple interesting statistics. I was speaking at an investment conference, and one of the speakers said, well, the housing price, the interest rates went up, but look at the absolute level. And he says, well, in 1980s, I bought a house and I had a mortgage at 10%. And he said, now mortgage rates are only 6%. And I think that is a dangerous statement. And let me tell you why. So let me give you a couple numbers. In 1980s, and I'm let's look at the kind of big round numbers. Those numbers are not exact. But in 1980s, housing prices to income were about 3.5 times. So in other words, if you made, $10,000, the average housing price, house price was about $35,000. So the ratio of house price to income was about 3.5. In the late 90s, that number was in 4s, kind of high 4s. Like in mid 4s, and maybe, before the pandemic, we were pushing 4.9. Today, we are pushing 5.9. So in other words, just let me put it this way: if you're making $150,000 a year, average house price today is you would be living in I'm $900,000 house. Why this is important? Because when interest rates go up to semi-normal level, when mortgage rates go up to 5 or 6%, the impact in the housing market is tremendous because people can't buy houses, not because they don't want to, because the banks will not lend the money. So the demand for houses will decline. And what's going to have to happen? The housing prices will have to decline. But what's also important is that a lot of the demand for goods and services came from consumers feeling wealthy, and a lot of that wealth came from financial assets. As the housing prices decline, the consumers will stop feeling wealthy. And that's actually going to have a significant impact on the demand for, think about, just like, I'll give you another framework. Somebody asked me, Vitaliy, how should we look at today's environment when you have high inflation? Should we go to the 70s and 80s? I said, you can do that. Or there's one thing you can do, something you can relate to. Just whatever happened to you over the last 20 years, invert it.
Yeah, that's right.
Just invert.
No, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just think about it, right? Your interest rates were declining, housing prices were going
Yeah.
up. Interest rates were declining, price to earnings were going up. Economy was growing at a faster rate than it should have grown. So just invert everything and you realize just all the good things were happening in the past, that's a payback time. So I'm looking at this inflation and I see that it's coming actually from multiple directions. Even before the war of Ukraine, we had this enormous, the government sent a huge amount of money to people and stuff their checking accounts. So you had a huge amount of liquidity from federal government and from Uncle Sam and from the uncle of the Federal Reserve. But then you had supply chain issues. You have shortage of labor. So all those things will kind of cause inflation. After when the war started, but then the war added a lot more fuel to this fire. How did it add fuel to the fire? Well, let's look at food prices. Okay, Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus are large exporters of wheat, and especially Russia and Ukraine. Okay, so that has been disrupted. But we looked at that, and those numbers did not worry us as much. Here's why. Because they accounted for about 7% of global exports of wheat. So, and if you look historically, the volatility from droughts, etc., was about as much. So when the supply declined by about 7%, wheat prices went up by a few percentage points. That's not what scares me. What scares me is that Russia and Belarus are the second and third largest exporters of fertilizer, of potash. And Canada is the largest. And if you think about fertilizer, there is like a common denominator in anything food related, from corn to cows to avocados, everything. So that's potash. But then if you look about another fertilizer, nitrogen, well, that one is derived from natural gas. And natural gas prices have doubled or tripled. Yeah. So, but the interesting part is, I don't think we have felt the impact of it yet, because right now we are still eating food that's been produced and grown a while back. So I think that is the story is about to play out. That's the future inflation. Okay. Obviously, you have high gasoline prices, higher heating bills because natural gas prices are up. So if you look at the consumer has been pushed from different directions. More, higher interest rates, higher food prices, higher gasoline prices. I'm sure I'm missing a few other things that are higher, but I am extremely, extremely concerned about the consumer in the kind of in the short and medium term. But also you ask me, how does it impact me as an investor? Well, the Seth Klarman said, I worry macro and I invest micro. So if you look at any company, it's a present value of its future cash flows. It's company depends on the company. It's going to be tied to economy more or less. If you own a company that's very tied to the health of the economy, and the economy is going to start growing at a slower speed, then the company's business will get impacted. Okay, so what we have done in our portfolios, and we've been doing it even before this war, we basically try to position ourselves owning companies that are not tied to the health of the economy. And I wrote a lot about this. I like the natural gas or oil pipelines. We own tobacco stocks. We own defense companies. So that's how kind of most of our companies are not really tied to the health of the economy, and that's what we've done by deliberately.
Right. And so when those kind of stocks tend to get attractive, it's sort of at the end of a period when, nobody really wanted them because they didn't see what is now happening. They don't see how the world can change. So I understand that, the worrying top down and investing bottom up, and they kind of come together oftentimes. If you're focused on what people don't want, nobody's thinking about it, nobody sees how the world can change. It's wise, actually, is what it is. It's very wise.
When interest rates are incredibly low, whoever has the richest imagination makes the most amount of money, right? Because you just look at this company that has a top line revenue growth, and you say, I think the total addressable market is this much, and if this company only gets this much, my God, this company will go up 500-fold, even though it's already trading 50 times revenues. And when interest rates go up and the credit markets start to free, actually when the people lend you money, they actually want to look at your cash flows. Suddenly investors, start to pay attention to the balance sheets, to cash flows. And suddenly dividends start, not just dividend, ability to stay in business becomes important. So I think that's what we've been going through the last 6 months.
And sales of The Intelligent Investor by Ben Graham go up too. when those
that's
things,
right. Yes.
It's proportional to the level of interest rates.
So I saw this meme, which was and I think that meme was a couple years old, 2 years ago. The meme was somebody breaks into a car, and there is a broken window, and there's a book in the car of Intelligent Investor, and somebody and the meme says, I saw you had a book in the car in Intelligent Investor, so I want to give you mine. so the guy broke into the car to give him his book of Intelligent Investor.
Yeah. That's about the size of it. Okay, so I'm glad that we talked about investing, but let's talk about your book, because there's a lot of wisdom in there, and it's not all directly. Much of it is not directly applicable to finance, but I find that in general, the topics generally enhance an investor's viewpoint. Maybe what we should do for our listener is maybe you should just tell me, just sum it up. What's the book about, and why did you want to write it?
Well, so the name of the book is Soul in the Game: The Art of a Meaningful Life. And I would argue it's about the most important investment you can make, investment in your life. So it's an investment book, but in a different way. So I started writing in 2004. And when I started writing, I mostly wrote about, at the beginning, just about investing. And when if you read my articles, if you were so unlucky to read my articles then, they were incredibly boring. Because I had extremely little self-confidence as a writer, because I was new to that. And I just didn't want to get embarrassed. And how do you not get embarrassed? By being very proper. And my sentence had a perfect structure, and they were incredibly boring. And then something interesting happened. Maybe 6 months into writing, I wrote about my experience with a TiVo device, and something didn't work. I called the customer support, and remember, this is 2004. The automated attendant was not very good, and voice recognition was not very good. And as your listeners can tell, I have an accent, so that attendant did not understand me well. The machine. So my son Jonah at the time was 3 years old. And he had this beautiful Disney accent. So I basically I would tell Jonah what to say into the phone, and he would talk to the attendant, and then the machine would understand them. So anyway, I wrote this article then.
A Disney accent?
Yeah, Disney, yes. And I wrote this little article, which had 500 or 600 words. That was it. That was the whole article. And it was published, and then I got a flood of emails. People absolutely loved that little story. And the irony of this, this story did not had as many or as a few insights as my other articles. But it was funny, it was personal, it was authentic. Um, and this was probably one of the most important articles I ever wrote because it changed it changed me as a writer. I realized I just need to be myself, and I had to. It took me a little bit more time to let my guard down even more. So over time, I started writing about like personal stuff. I started to write about my trips, with my kids, my father to Santa Fe, or about classical music, or about travails of parenting, or classical music composers. So over time, as my readership has grown, people would email me and say, Vitaliy, I actually started reading your articles for because of investing, but actually I keep coming back because your stories about life. And that was at first that was shocking to me because I'm a professional investor, but I'm not a professional what the person who writes about life, I guess. But I never look at
Right,
myself.
storyteller. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I'm not a novelist. And so what happened was kind of interesting. Then people would tell me, oh, I wish you took your articles and put them into a book. And I always dismissed it. And then in August 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, um, I was writing about Tchaikovsky. And I was writing about the struggles he was having with writing one of his uh, pieces for violin. And what shocked me about this is that when we listen to classical Tchaikovsky's music, it's beautiful, and we kind of take it for granted that it was an incredible amount of struggle and personal pain it took Tchaikovsky to write it. And when I realized that creative process, either that being writing about classical music, classical music. Let me put it this way: writing classical music or writing about classical music, um, composing classical music or writing about it, is very similar because there is a lot of pain and anxiety and self-doubt. And so after I finished that article, I realized, oh my God, somebody who is actually about to start writing, wanting to write, could actually learn a lot from this. And I realized that actually they could actually learn from a lot of articles I wrote in the past. So what I did, I took all these articles, for a lot previous 18 years, about life, and I put them into a book, and then I ended up rewriting 2/3 of them and writing another 40% of the book while I was kind of editing, the book. So that's how the book came about. So it's if you want, I can just give you kind of the main topics. It's about parenting, classical music, self improvement. There's a huge section, like probably 1/3 of the book, about Stoic philosophy. There's a uh, I spent a lot of time talking about meaning of life, creativity, and that's kind of the weirdest book in the world, but it works.
It does. Let's just take a couple of these. We won't be able to get to everything, obviously, but
Sure.
why write about classical music? What could you possibly? I mean, I know because I've read some of the book and quite a bit of the book,
Yeah.
and your pieces. When you published them originally. But tell us why classical music? Because this topic is never treated in any book by any financial person.
Well, let's start with this. First of all, I love classical music, right? So any opportunity I get to write about it, I get to learn about it, right? Because it's for me to write about it, I have to spend a lot of time reading and researching it. So that's why I wrote it. So original intent was just kind of very selfish, just for me to learn. But as I wrote more about this, I mean, as I learned more and more about classical music composers, I learned there are so many lessons. Like we just talked about, Tchaikovsky's pain of writing his piece for violins. So that's one example. Let me give you a few examples, and let me actually draw a parallel between that example and value investing. How's that? So let me take you back to early 19th century in Vienna, like 1800s. And at the time, Beethoven was the most famous composer in the world. Like he was like Michael Jackson or Frank Sinatra, who are not composers but artists, but on steroids. He was known everywhere around the world. And if you lived in Vienna and you were composing music, you would have had a very miserable existence because everything you write would be compared to Beethoven. Okay, and that, just imagine that. And so there was this composer who lived there, Franz Schubert, who lived like a few blocks away from Beethoven. Imagine being Franz Schubert, because everything like everything that's composed, he composes, people say, well, Beethoven did it better, or or you get accused of trying to copy Beethoven, etc. So for that reason, Franz Schubert, who wrote almost 6,000 pieces of music, published almost nothing. He was supported by his friends and died in a very early age, like early 30s, destitute. And a lot of the irony of this, if you listen to today, when we listen to Franz Schubert or we listen to Beethoven, we don't say Beethoven is better as Franz Schubert. Franz Schubert has incredible music that, by the way, personally, I can relate to more to Schubert's music than to Beethoven's, but that's me. And they're beautiful in different ways. But I also want you to think about a couple other things. When Beethoven wrote his Ninth Symphony, somebody said, like, this is the day the music died because you can't write anything better than this. The perfect symphony has been composed, and Beethoven Ninth. So number one, I'm so glad Tchaikovsky, Rachmaninoff, and others who were born after Beethoven did not get the message, because we would have missed out on a lot of other beautiful music. But also think about, actually, we will never know the impact Beethoven had on classical music, because how many composers like Franz Schubert who actually wrote beautiful music but never published it? So why am I telling you this? Here's why. If you are in any profession, there's always going to be somebody who considered to be the greatest, whatever. Like in our case, we have the greatest investor of all time, Warren Buffett. And it's so easy for us to just copy Warren Buffett. And first of all, it's all, kind of just to blindly copy Warren Buffett. Instead, what we should be doing, we should be looking how Warren Buffett is thinking. Also, we should not be afraid to think on our own. And but because we may actually be impacted and constrained by Warren Buffett's thinking. Let me give you an example. For a long time, Warren Buffett was saying that I don't invest in technology companies because I don't understand them. And I would argue it's okay for Warren Buffett to say this when he was 70, 80, or 90 years old, okay? Because, he did not understand them that well. Well, there are several lessons. Number one, what you should learn is not, as an investor, not that you should not invest in technology companies, that what you should learn is you need to be in a circle of competence. And your circle of competence may be very different than Warren Buffett's circle of competence. That's number one. Number two is that even Warren Buffett pushed his circle of competence and invested billions of dollars into Apple, which is a technology company. And by the way, as I understand, that has been the most successful trade investment ever, based on the billions of dollars Berkshire made. But also, you could look at how the way Buffett invests, and you could actually build your own path.
Right. That's the important part, isn't it?
That's right. No, that's exactly right. This another composer, Berlioz. And this is a beautiful story. I absolutely love this story. So he learned he started to take music classes relatively late, when he was 12 or 13 years old. So he did not receive he did not receive as much traditional training as many other composers. And so when he wrote his Symphonie Fantastique, he broke all the rules, not because he was breaking, because he did not know them, right? And therefore, he created almost a brand new type of music. That he wrote what's called a program symphony. So there's a two type of music. There's program music and non-program. Non-program music. If you look or listen to almost any piano concerto, etc., there is no theme behind it. Where if you think about the most typical program music would be an opera, which is a play which has a theme, right? And like think about Macbeth opera. It's based on Shakespearean Macbeth plus singing plus music, right? So, well, Berlioz wrote Symphonie Fantastique, which had its own story underneath, and he broke all the rules, and that became one of the most successful pieces of late 1800s, early 1900s, because he was not constrained by traditional thinking.
Gorgeous piece too. So this tells me, a lot about why one ought to, explore the history and listen to classical music. But why do you torture your kids with it?
So there are different ways you can torture. So let me give you my guide to torturing the kids' classical music. Okay, so there are two ways you can torture them. So my older brothers were sent to take piano lessons, and they both hated taking piano lessons. And I think my parents kind of took them out of music school after my oldest brother literally pulled the keys out of the piano. So that was like so he literally had to break the piano so he would not be playing on this anymore. And I would argue that my parents, if we looked at it now, they would probably, if they could do redo, which you can't as a parent, they would probably not do that. They would not force them to take piano lessons. And by doing that, I think my brother lost interest in classical music. My oldest brother lost interest in classical music completely. My middle brother has some interest, but he doesn't have the passion I have. I was spared because my parents, I think, learned the lessons of my older brothers. I didn't have a talent. And also what happened was my mom died when I was very young. So I took a few piano lessons, and my father saw that I just I don't have I really don't have the drive, and my father just did not have the willpower. He just couldn't fight it, so he just he did not push me. But so that's one type of torture. Another thing is that my parents always took me to classical music concerts, and they listened to classical music at home. When they took me to classical music concerts, I enjoyed them as much as any 8 or 9-year-old would enjoy classical music concert. Not very much. But what they did during the break, they would buy me dessert. So I would go to the musical concerts because of that. And you know what? But here's what happens. Classical music is very complex. When you listen to pop music, and this is not me trying to dunk on a pop music, but like you listen to classical, to most of the pop music, you get it right away because it's very simple. I'm not. A lot of it is, right. That's why it's popular. Classical music has a lot of layers, and in not all of it, but I'm generalizing right now. But a lot of like symphonies, for instance, they usually have a lot of layers, and you get to appreciate the bottom layer after you listen to it 5 or 10 times. And the first time you listen to almost any symphony, you probably won't even like it. And this is at least right now when I say this, I'm talking about myself. And so my father, so the classical music requires work in quotes. In the sense that in the beginning, you have to listen to it several times before it starts clicking with you. So by exposing myself to this music when I was little, my parents basically took up the first couple of top layers. So when I'll give an example, Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto, I listened to it so many times when I was in a young age that when I was an adult and I heard it, it clicked with me right away. If my parents did not expose me in a young age, it probably would not have clicked with me right away. And so today, I learned my lesson. My older kids, we tried taking them to piano lessons. They did not want to take piano lessons, and we did not push them. We pushed them a little bit, But then when we realized that they really don't want to do it, so we stopped pushing them. My youngest one, we took her to piano lessons and she didn't care for it. And then maybe 6 months later, she started, she's 8 now. She started just sit down next to piano and start playing. And my job as a parent to notice that. And now we took her to a music teacher and she's taking piano lessons and she loves it. So anyway, so there, and I listen to classical music in the car all the time. I listen to it at home. And that's the kind of torture I'm talking about. All my job is not to tell them you should listen to it and you should love it. Just listen to it and expose him to that. Take him to the concerts and buy him Sprite or buy him a cookie, whatever, the dessert after the concerts. So like, by the way, like food is my kind of my weapon of choice when it comes to, getting my, doing anything my kids, like we go to concerts and we go to Dairy Queen. So that's, or we go to sushi. So that's how I bribe my kids, basically. Yeah.
So, doesn't sound so bad for the kids. They do get something out of it, even if they don't want to listen to music. And I'm sure it's like you say, there's that familiarity effect from listening, early in your life. That's what what the Suzuki kids, the little, 5-year-olds who are violin virtuosos, by the time they play the piece on the violin, they've heard it 100 times because they emphasize the repeated listening. And, I can vouch for that on in my own musical experiences as well. I've listened to, the pieces that I play the best on the guitar are ones that I've listened to like for years before I even attempted to play them. So it's just a learning process. You learn, and your soul learns to appreciate it. Whether there's a whole process going on that you don't even know about, that if you just let it go into your ears, it's wonderful.
I remember you sent me an email with a box. I forget what it was, a piano.
Goldberg Variations.
Yes. And you said you have to listen to it until you get it.
Yeah.
And you're right. And I think you're absolutely right. I had to listen 20 times to get it. So
yeah, I remember. I've done this with other things too. I've done it with films. I remember I sat down and I went into a theater. I was by myself, and I went to see Pulp Fiction because somebody recommended it. And I thought, God, this is kind of boring. And I walked out on it, and somebody said, just go see it again. And I said, okay. And the second time, somehow, like the music and the costumes and the whole sort of 70s-esque shtick of it got me. And I became, quite a fan of it. So, it's a funny.
Can we explore this for a second? Because
sure. I was just going to say, it's funny to me that people view like, basically consuming art and music as this thing that either immediately clicks or immediately doesn't. And both of us are kind of saying, well, not really. If it's something really great, it might not click right away, and you should kind of try it again, because it really is worth it when it does click. It's a much deeper and more satisfying experience than when you hear like a pop song that clicks with you right away.
So I would take this and I would also relate it to books.
Yes.
And because there are two things. There's a couple things. So when you read the book the first time, sometimes what happens, you may be reading faster because of your curiosity, what happens next. And therefore you may be missing details. So when you read it for the second or third times, you may notice things that you missed the first time. Also, and this is important, when you read the book 2 or 3 years later, or 5 years later, or 10 years later, it's a different person who is reading the book. Because it's not like you and I can stay constant. We mature, we have new experiences. In the book, I talk about how I read Dale Carnegie's book when I was 18 in Russia. And I read this book and I really hated it, because I felt this was so superficial and so fake. And then I read this book when I was, I think, in my late 30s, maybe early 40s. And I was shocked how important that book is, how great the book is. And like a lot of books, like especially, like I'll give you an example, like Nassim Taleb's books, you have to read them multiple times because there is so much insight and they're so dense that you get those insights in the second, or third, or fourth read. So, anyway, so anything, like, let me put it this way, like you can relate to music again, right? Anything that's the less complex things are, like so less complex things are, the more likely you're going to get it on the
Mm.
first time. The more complex it is, now we can relate it to
Mhm.
books as well, right? The more likely that you need to read it, kind of expose yourself to it multiple times to actually get the full value
Right.
out of it.
Right. And it's interesting too because something can be a very compelling read and can be written in a way that tells a great story, ticks all the right emotional boxes, and yet there's so much more to it. And Taleb's books are kind of a good example of that because he tells these stories about, I don't know, Fat Tony, and he makes up these characters and stuff to describe parts of his own personality, really, we find out. And so, it's fun to read about that, but then there's always this much deeper level of insight that you might not get the first time around. And I think a lot of great literature and great ideas and things worth doing. And it's sort of, life is like that. Things worth doing take time, right? Nothing great happens overnight, whether it appears to or not.
You're 100% right.
And your book didn't happen overnight, did it? I mean,
Well, so it's kind of interesting. There was no way I could. So, you're making a good point. I could not have written this book if I had to write it from start to finish as a book. So, you can fault me for going back and taking the articles I've written in the past and putting them together, and I'm not hiding that fact. But every single time I wrote that article, I was consumed by certain emotions that I could only write at that point in time. So a lot of the book is that, and as you can tell by, and me, that I'm an emotional person. So a lot of and emotions actually what probably brings flavor, to my book, to my writing. There is, this book is, basically, think about it. It's my articles that I've written in the last 18 years that have been rewritten, and edited, etc. But it's me, like a lot of them is, it's kind of me 18 years ago at that point in time writing that, or me 3 years ago, or me 6 months ago. Yeah.
So I want you to do something for me real quick. We just mentioned Nassim Taleb, and he, of course, has a book called Skin in the Game. And your book is called Soul in the Game. So what's the difference? What is soul in the game versus skin in the game?
Okay. So I read Skin in the Game, and there was this one chapter, which was probably one of the least colorful chapters for most people, which was called Soul in the Game. And when I read the chapter, I was completely mesmerized by that chapter, by this concept of having soul in a game. Because to me, it's almost like a next level of, above of having a skin in the, above skin in the game. So let's talk about what skin in the game means. Okay. To summarize, it's basically when you deal with somebody, you want to make sure that that person enjoys not just the upside of the relationship with you, but the downside as well. The easiest example is when somebody manages your money, you don't want them just to charge you a management fee. You want them also to own the same stocks you do, because if they're buying a stock for you and it goes down, you want them to experience a similar type of pain you do. The reason it's important because then when they will not be buying you anything that would just make them rich but not make you rich. And the reason it's important because in Wall Street would create any product people desire, but not necessarily products that like they'll make soup for you to drink for eat, but they won't be eating that soup. Okay, like if you look right now, all these financial instruments that are blowing up, those financial instruments were created by Wall Street for the customers to consume, but they will not be consuming it. So that's kind of the concept of skin in the game. Soul in the game, it's a basically take the skin in the game and add like the way I look at it is kind of break it up into two things. First, we have to choose the game, and second of all, you have to figure, you have there was a concept of soul, which is we'll deal with that in a second. Let's talk about the game first. So when you choose activities that going to consume a very large part of your life, your career, your hobbies, uh, even your interactions with other people, you want to ask yourself a question: is this the game I want to play? Okay. And when you figure out, is that the game you want to play? You ask yourself a question. Um, Does this game give me good problems? What is a good problem? Good problem will have its own pains. If you do anything creative, you're gonna go through periods of times where you struggle, where you suffer, we experience pain. Investing could be painful. A lot of investors will tell you right now, investing is painful, could be painful. But so is doing anything creative, writing music, writing anything is great. Brings it has its own amount of pain. So even training for marathon, is painful, right? But the question is, if that's the pain you're willing to suffer through, then it's a good problem for you. Then so let me give you this example. I work out twice a week with a trainer, and I absolutely hate working out. The only reason I do this because I know it's good for my health. And the reason I have a trainer, because I have this Ukrainian guy who used to be a world champion in a deadlift, telling me, pushing me to work out twice a week. I have no soul in the game, zero when I work out, and that is not a good problem for me. I don't love this problem, but the only reason I do this is because I know I have to. Okay, if my life was just me working out, I would have a one miserable life. It's a good thing I only subject myself to doing this twice a week. Okay, so you see how I have no soul in the game when it comes to this, because this is not a good problem for me. Now, when it comes to writing, when it comes to investing, I know that when I do this, I'm gonna experience pain. And this is the most important part. When if you told me, Vitaliy, here's a pill, you take this, and you don't have to work out ever again, I would have said, thank you, Dan. I'll take the pill and I would stop working out. Okay. So, because that's not a good problem for me. Now, if you tell me, Vitaliy, just hire a ghostwriter, he'll write a book for you, you stamp your name on it. I would never do this. And the reason I would not do this, because the process of writing the book, and I promise you, a lot of times it's a very painful, frustrating process, is what gives me meaning. It's a good problem for me. So when you choose problems in your life, good problems, they usually have a meaning, soul in the game. The game has meaning to you. Now, what is soul?
I just want to say, skin in the game and soul in the game both are defined by downside, aren't they? Downside participation in both cases.
Yes. Well, that's right. But then the soul in the game is your soul is basically your attitude towards what you're doing. Okay, let's talk about the attitude. And some of that is defined by Taleb, some of it is defined by me. So, number one, money is usually a secondary consideration when you have when you have a soul in a game. In other words, I don't write, like, I don't care, like, I wrote this book, or I come to work every day, which is ironically because I do investing, which is money related. But I would do it even if I didn't get paid. Number one. Number two, I would not do anything that would give me financial benefit but would hurt my clients, or give a message to somebody in the book that I thought was a flawed message, but it would make me more money. Okay, so money is always secondary consideration for me. Or somebody has soul in the game. It's you also have, you obviously you have you also have a skin in the game. There is a certain amount of art in when you have a sword in the game. There's a certain amount of art. Okay, and so I have this concept, which is art or craft. Any activity you do, there is a certain amount of craft, mixture of art or craft, and this is a very important concept actually. My brother and I, my brother, my son and I were in Venice, and we went to a Murano factory where they make Murano glass. And we saw this guy make a horse out of bulb of glass, and it literally took him in 30 seconds, and suddenly this horse shows up in front of us. And my brother and I and my son, we walked around Murano, and we were discussing, is that like what this guy was doing, art or craft? And we kind of were debating this, and when we looked in all the stores, they sell these horses that look identical, just the same horse that we saw born in front of us. There's thousands of these horses, so we kind of agreed that okay, this must be a craft. But then I realized it's the wrong way of looking at this. The way we should be looking at this, any activity when we start that has a lot of creativity in it, in the beginning, it's mostly going to be art. And the reason it's art because there is a lot of uncertainty because you don't know exactly what's going to come out at the end. But after you do this many, many times, the art element goes away, some of that, and becomes a craft. You play guitar, right? When you were studying chords, in the beginning, it was all art. After 6 months, you knew all the chords, and it was mostly craft. I'm just talking about the chords part, even though there's still some art left in them, right? Because you knew if you're going to push this and you know exactly how to push the strings, if you put your fingers in the right way, you knew the sound you're going to make, right? So in any activity you do, the longer you do it, the less art left. Just, it's a question of how much. Let me tell you, by the way, somebody who doesn't have any art in the activity. If you work on assembly line on Fiat, there's zero art or craft. If you write, especially if you write about the same subject all the time, over time there's a little bit less art left, a lot more craft. So it's a continuum. When you have soul in a game, you're gonna have the right balance. When you have you're gonna have the right balance of art and craft. Because if you only have craft, you're gonna have a very miserable existence, very boring, miserable existence. And there's a lot more other concepts because I know we are limited on time. So there's a lot more items that I describe in the book that I describe what soul in the game is, but those are the highlights.
And we are out of time, but we've barely scratched the surface. There's a lot more in the book than what we've discussed today. So, but I do need to I need to run my final question by you, as I do for every guest on the podcast. And that is simply, if you could leave our listener with a single thought today, what would it be?
Aside from let's go by my book. Okay, no.
Besides that.
I think okay. So I think be kind. I mean, I think that over the years that became part of my identity. So whenever I try to interact with other people, and that, by the way, it didn't come naturally to me. It's something I had to train in myself. I always ask myself, have I been a net positive to in this interaction or net negative? So, and I always try to be net positive. And I'll give you this example. When I get a telemarketer's call, I actually force myself to be kind to that person, even though it's extremely annoying, etc. And the reason I do this because kindness is kind of for at least for me, it's a muscle. It's something that you have to train yourself to behave in certain, and over time it becomes, if you do this long enough, it becomes part of your identity and it's going to become part of you. But I think if we just keep doing this, then I think the world can be a little bit better. Like, if people you interact with are kind, then just the world will be better. So one of my core values is just to be net positive to society. So, and that's, in all honesty, this book, like, people won't believe me, when I say this, because it's coming from this capitalistic pig who was born in Russia and etc. But this book was like, I look at, if somebody reads this book and it has a net positive impact on them, if they teaches them something and makes their life a little bit brighter, I'm done. So that's it doesn't matter how much it sells. I just really want this book to touch people, and that's why I wrote it. But anyway, so be kind. That's my answer to your question.
It will touch them if they read it. So listen, it's always great to talk with you, and I'm really glad that you emailed and gave us a chance to talk some more. Thanks so much. Thanks for being here, man.
It's my pleasure. Let me just say one last thing. So this book has a website, soulinthegame.net. Why it's important? Because after I wrote the book, I wrote 5 new chapters. So if somebody buys the book and goes to this website, there are instructions how they can get 5 new chapters absolutely free. So if they go to soulinthegame.net.
All right, soulinthegame.net. Sounds good. I didn't know about that. I'm going to go there right away.
All right.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Vitaliy.
Thank you, Dan.
If you enjoyed this episode, you might enjoy Vitaliy's 2021 Almanac, a collection of his best articles from 2021, packed together with some art for a pleasant read. To download a free copy, visit contrarianedge.com/almanac. To listen to more episodes, visit investor.fm. Enjoy life and prosper.